Hello Facebookers! Welcome to episode number 2 of HealthHackers. My name's Gemma Evans. I'm a TV presenter and a journalist here in the UK, and this is my series just for Facebook. It's called HealthHackers, and it's where I interview some of the most pioneering and influential figures from the world of health. And sitting next to me today is my guest, Professor Tim Spector. We are in his research lab in London, and we want to hear your questions. If you see me looking down lots, it's because I've got my laptop here and I'm looking at what you're writing on my page so that I can put your questions to Tim. So I'm looking at all your comments and questions. Want to hear what you think about Tim and his book and his views. This is his book, The Diet Myth. Tim, while the questions are coming in, we're going to have a little chat about you and your background. And I should point out, everybody, that we're not offering any medical advice. This is just for information and discussion and opinion, and we're all learning together. You can consult your own doctors about your own medical conditions. Now, Tim, you know everything about the gut microbiome and genetics. I'd say that's correct. Is that right?
Well, we all know very little, so, you know.
You're modest. You probably know more than most of us, though, don't you?
It's all relative, yes.
Give us a little overview of how you came to be this top expert in the gut microbiome and how important our microbiome is to us.
I came to be interested in it about 6-7 years ago for selfish reasons, really. Firstly, I got ill myself, and I decided that I wanted to learn more about how best diets could suit me, and it soon became obvious that no one really knew the answer to that. And one of the reasons I thought no one was understanding anything is that we hadn't really understood about the gut microbiome, which is this whole new organ in our bodies which we've previously ignored. And so I really got into this whole field and diverted my research group's interest into discovering more about the microbiome we all have and how we're all so different in our microbes, and that this difference is how we all respond differently to foods, and explains a lot of the mysteries that we've had before.
So you call it an organ, but is it just trillions and trillions of gut bacteria inside us?
Yes, I mean, but in a way, like any organ is trillions of or billions of cells stuck together, like our liver or whatever. In fact, it's just held together in a skin. And it's a community that works together. So no microbe acts on its own. It's all part of this living community of trillions of these microbes, and they're all producing together chemicals and vitamins and hormones and sending out signals as a group rather than as individuals.
Okay, are they mainly in our guts, or does it go lower down?
Well, 99% of them are in our guts. Most of them are in the lower part of the guts, the colon, and that's where we think most of the action is, but we're biased at the moment because that's what we can easily look at, because we can measure it by taking samples of our poo, which we can't do from other bits of the body. But we're pretty sure that in terms of the numbers, the vast majority are there. We're not ruling out the fact that other bugs in other bits of our body in more discrete areas could also be having an impact.
Okay. Facebookers, if you just joined us, this is HealthHackers episode 2. This is Professor Tim Spector. He knows all about the gut microbiome. And if you've got a question about poop or anything else to do with your gut health, put it in the comment section. If I keep looking down, it's because I'm looking at what you're saying on my laptop, and I can put your questions to Tim. Tim, why do we want to have a happy, thriving microbiome? What benefit will that bring us?
We know that the healthier your microbiome, the healthier your body is in general, because it means that your immune system is being well balanced, it's not over-responding, it's giving you resistance against infections, it's not overreacting to give you allergies. Also, if your microbiome is stable, which means it's full of diverse species, that also means that you're probably metabolically better, so that your body is self-regulating in terms of appetite, and you're not massively overeating or undereating. You're just getting this balance right of the energy and the system, how it's working. So we also know that they produce a lot of our vitamins for us as well, and hormones, and can affect our mood as much as anything else. So and how we interact with medicines and drugs, etc. So
yeah. I've got some questions on that coming up. I will put your questions to Tim. I'll make sure he's aware of what you're all saying. Now, when I first met you, Tim, it was when I was making a documentary, and I spoke to Tim about personalised medicine. And you told me that actually you can tell more about a person and what foods they should be eating to be most healthy by looking at a sample of their poop. Can you explain how come that is?
Yes, so I was comparing it to DNA.
Yeah.
Because there are lots of tests out there, commercial companies trying to say we can measure your profile by measuring your genes. And at the time I said, well, as a geneticist I can say that's pretty rubbish. Statistically it might be true, but actually at a personal level it's of virtually no use. And so our microbes are so much more different than our DNA makeup. We share only, for example, about 20 or 30% of our microbes, any two people, so you and I wouldn't share very many at all. And so understanding how that community is and what's different should mean that I can tell whether someone is healthy or whether they're more likely to get fat or get diabetes, looking at the general diversity of what's going on. And I can also try and now use this information when you've got thousands of people to try and predict what the best foods are for people.
Well, that's what I want to talk about your book now. This is Tim's book, The Diet Myth. You can see that there. In here we talk about the way that we as a society have been told to eat largely for the last 30 years and told to do lots of exercise and go low fat, count calories. What's wrong with that, do you think?
It's just very old fashioned. It's like, very 20th century. We only really understood food in terms of rather primitive concepts in these very broad categories, which are of fats and sugars and proteins. And we've ignored one of the big ones, which is fibre. But it's also missing the point because a food isn't just one of these three categories. It's hundreds of chemicals. You take a banana is 600 different chemicals, which combined with the trillions of microbes, they will convert that into 6,000 chemicals. And those chemicals have effects on your body. And everyone is different, and so you and I will eat the same banana but have different effects because the chemicals are produced are going to be quite different. And it's until we understand that we can't simplify these into just these three blocks because someone say, oh, fat is bad, this is good, this is bad. It doesn't matter. It's the total amount of chemicals that you're getting and how they affect your body that are important. So this is where we've lost track of. We've tried to simplify it, and we've tried to say that calories in equals calories out, and that one size fits all. And if everybody has this 2,000 calories a day, they'll be perfect. And of course, that advice has led to the whole world getting fatter, and erroneous advice that fat is bad for you. Therefore, avoid all things with fat, even healthy things, super healthy things like olive oil.
People still do think that fat is bad.
Yes.
Fat. Some people.
Because the government guidelines around the world have still included, they won't admit that they're wrong, and that, yes, there are certain fats that are bad for you, and yes, there are certain fats that are good for you. But it's got to be taken in the context of the balanced foods you're eating. And we mustn't, if you throw away everything with fat in it, you throw away lots of good things. That makes our diets much more restrictive and therefore unhealthier. So that's why when you do a trial, people who have low-fat diets end up worse off than people with high-fat, diverse diets.
That's interesting. So is diversity the key to staying slim?
It appears to be the general factor. I mean, I'm not against, for the reasons I've talked about the microbiome, I don't want to generalise, and everybody is going to be somewhat different. But if you had to have one rule, people on very restrictive diets don't do well, and people who have the more diverse diets will have different things to eat every day, different nutrients, are going to have a more diverse group of microbes, and those microbes, the more diverse they are, the healthier. So the more species you can create, it's a bit like a gardener going in there trying to get as many different plants in their garden as possible to grow, and once you've got this really diverse community there, they're very stable, very hard to shift, and super healthy.
So do you think that if you put on weight, that's because your unique microbiome is responding to the foods that you're eating in a way that is making you put on weight, whereas the next person might have a lesser response from their microbiome and they don't get fat from eating the same calories as the next person? Because you did a twin study on this, didn't you?
Yes, we did. And the twin studies clearly showed us that if you're overweight, you had a less diverse microbes here, less species in there than the skinny twins.
Really?
So that's clearly aligned, and that mouse experiments have shown that if you take a poo sample, a fecal transplant from a skinny twin, and you put it into a mouse, you'll keep that mouse skinny even if you overfeed them. So those microbes are doing a really good job working overtime to convert metabolically, keep that stuff away from going into fat. They're burning it up in ways we don't really understand, but that's what they're doing. And so your chances of having good microbes will increase the more you've got of them. So the people who have very limited numbers of microbes, who have very limited diets, or that are on just processed foods, have an increasingly small amount of nutrients in there, and only a few microbe species like that restrictive diet, and they elbow the others out, and then they can't react in healthy ways. So
if you should have a diverse diet to get lots of different types of bugs inside you, does that include eating junk food as well, for its diversity?
It's a good question. I think there's no harm in having the occasional bit of junk food, and I think we mustn't get away with this idea that these things are so deadly that people get paranoid about being given one sausage once a year at Christmas. I think probably having a burger once a year could actually be good for your system, because it does wake things up, a bit of fat and a bit of this other stuff.
My husband will be pleased to hear that.
But you can only really do that safely if you've got a really high fibre, diverse diet on the basis of it.
Okay.
So that they've done this stuff in animals, in mice, where they feed them lots of chickpeas, for example, and other lentils, and build up their fibre levels, and then they give them intermittent burgers equivalent of a high-fat meal, and they don't put on weight. Whereas if they're given those burgers without that baseline,
really,
they do. So I think it's all about everything in moderation, but getting this mix and getting your base right. And so I don't want to demonise all foods, and they're totally against this sort of concept of the clean eating. There's such a thing as a clean.
We're talking about the kind of primal outlook where it's not eating anything processed, eating meats and veggies.
Yes, because
you don't want to demonise that.
No, I mean, and I think everything is. It's very hard to avoid any processed food. I mean, processed food. What is processed food? Is cheese, right? I mean, someone's processing it for you. You're making it. Yeah. You've got the milk, and you make it, processing it to make it in something, and that's very good for you generally. Lots of microbes in it. Yogurt is processed. All kinds of things. It depends where you draw the line. I mean, ultra processed food that has got so many chemicals in it. Keep those to absolute minimum. But I don't think we want to be too black and white about this, because otherwise people will go into this very narrow band of things they feel they should eat.
Is that why you called your book The Diet Myth? Because it's all a myth. Every diet's a fad in your view, is that right?
Pretty much. That is it. Yes, and most diet, or virtually all diets, end up people restricting what they eat, which actually has a long-term effect of reducing your microbes, and therefore they're less able to cope with modern living.
Facebookers, thank you for your questions. I keep looking down. It's not me being rude, it's because I'm looking at what you're saying on my Facebook page. I'm going to put your questions to Tim now, but I need to remind you we're not giving any medical advice. We're just having a discussion, and if you have a medical issue, then that's best to sort out with your own doctor. So Tim, Eve would like to know, should we listen to our bodies and eat what we feel like? Is that our microbes craving a certain taste? Should we feed them what they want?
It's a good question, and I don't think there's a single answer, because there are some instances where they've found some young kids who, at the age of 6, weigh about 10 stone.
At 6?
Okay. They're just barrels, because they've got a single species of microbe that's taken over, and that is very highly inflammatory and seems to be driving their appetite. So these are rare occasions that you can get these cravings due to an appetite. And when they wiped out that microbe, and they totally transformed that kid's gut, then the cravings went away. So
maybe don't. Maybe
don't
we
always. But at the same time, I do like the idea that you should listen to your gut in some respects, and trial and error is important. But your microbes could be fooling you because they don't always have your interests at heart. Mostly they
really
do, but occasionally you get a rogue group in there that
want to cause havoc.
yes.
Rich would like to know, what are the best foods and drinks to improve gut health?
That's very broadly foods that are high fibre. So that's the first thing because they've got
veggies.
So fibre is what microbes live off. Basically, it's the hard to digest foods that can actually get to the colon. Most of the processed foods that we all eat are absorbed. They have lots of sugar and fat, and they're absorbed very early. So you want some complex plants. So veggies are the number one. Fruits are the second ones. And then you've got fermented foods. So anything that's fermented, so the yogurts, the kefirs, the kimchi, the sauerkrauts, and your Japanese fermented soy products, kombucha, anything fermented, and even fermented chocolate.
Is there such a thing? Oh.
Well, most chocolate, if it's good quality, is actually fermented. Yes.
Okay, and
so
that's
uses
good
microbes.
For our gut health.
So and then the other thing is these foods that contain polyphenols, because polyphenols are a particular energy source for microbes. So anything brightly coloured generally has got polyphenols in it.
Olive oil.
Olive oil has masses of polyphenols. Blueberries, raspberries, blackberries, they're all high polyphenols, as well as I said, lots of dark chocolate, peanuts, seeds, coffee, green tea.
And this is all good for feeding our microbes and in turn making it more diverse, which makes us healthier.
Yes.
And slimmer.
And some
and happier, would you say?
In general, yes. I think they can improve your mood. I mean, in animals, they've been able to change anxiety and depression.
That's fascinating.
Just by manipulating the microbes.
Well, yeah, I mean, I've got another question. Is there a link between gut health and mental health of any kind, whether that's depression, autism, or dementia? Have you done any studies on that?
Yes, I mean, some of them we have. I mean, there's some published studies on autism showing that, particularly kids, they've studied, they've shown really reduced diversity of microbes in autism, and in mouse models, when they've replaced it, they've improved the mouse model of autism by improving the microbes. So there's anecdotal stories of some kids changing their microbes and improving their mood. Now, there are practical problems about doing that because many these kids have some very fastidious diets they don't want to change, but in theory it looks possible. Similarly, depression, anxiety in humans, generally we see differences in the microbes, and in animal models they know they can change the mood by transplanting from a happy mouse to an anxious mouse.
Do you know
and
which
vice
one?
versa.
So if you were anxious or depressed, would you know which strains of microbes would help improve?
Not yet, no.
Not yet.
So a lot of this stuff is crude. We know that it has major effects, but we don't know the specifics and don't know exactly how we transform that into a particular probiotic or group of microbes to do it. But we know the potential's there, and we know that the blunderbuss approach, which is like a fecal transplant, is something that does have an effect, and it's going to take us a few years to work out what it is in that whole group of everything that's really
With
working.
your stool transplants, have you ever found that you could take the stool of a thin person and transplant it into an overweight person and see the overweight person then lose weight?
Yes, well, we've done that with our twin experiments, but it's been in mice. There's been 2 studies now of overweight or obese diabetics where they've been given poo transplants from thin people. And the results have been not sensational, but they've helped the diabetes.
Really?
So the diabetes level, the sugar levels have improved.
Did they lose weight?
But they didn't significantly lose weight. And the problem is, in these fecal transplant experiments, it seems to be that only a proportion of people respond. So, like in ulcerative colitis, which is a very common autoimmune disease that can be really quite bad, 1 in 4 people go into get a cure with a fecal transplant, but 3/4 don't. And we're trying to work out why it is that some people respond and not. And I think this is going to be the case with obesity as well. So we're still a way off, but if you've got a severe disease and it means you don't have to take drugs again, most people would take a 1 in 4, 1 in 5 shot rather than taking drugs for years.
Yeah, well, talking of poop, I've seen you tweeting about oral capsules filled with poop. What's all that about?
Well, there's lots of ways of getting your normal donor poop into you.
Oh, right.
And this is so you can have it through a tube down your nose, up your bottom, or I think aesthetically, these so-called crap-sules are where the future is, because you can manufacture them easily. They're frozen, and you just take 30 of these and you swallow them, and they don't open up until they get to your lower colon.
Okay,
And basically that's a way that you can get someone else's microbes in you pretty quickly, and this is what a lot of these new trials are using. So they're actually commonplace in the US, and we're just a bit slow in this country, in the UK.
Okay, Facebookers, I've got your questions here. I'm putting them to Tim. Rosie would like to know, how does the microbiome change or affect our hormonal balance, if at all?
We're not seeing major changes on hormones when we've looked, say, premenopausal women and postmenopausal women, just with the microbes. There probably are some, but they're quite subtle. Some mouse experiments have interestingly shown differences when you transplant from a male to a female and a female to a male. At the moment, when you ask for a donor, you don't specify the gender.
Yeah.
And so at the moment everyone's quite happy because they're very sick generally, so I don't mind who I get mine from. There's some evidence that in these animals that it could be just there is a subtle difference between male and female gut microbes, but if they are, it's pretty subtle at the moment.
Jan would like to know your view on, I won't name the brand, but the little yogurt drinks that you buy in supermarkets. She finds them quite expensive, but her son insists on having one every morning. Is there an alternative that would be better?
I think no one really knows. We know in general probiotics do seem to work for people who are sick, people who are young, people who are old, or people on antibiotics. There's no hard evidence yet they work in probiotics supplements. This is work on people who are normal. They don't prevent things. So I'm generally in favour of using food, so yogurts, kefirs, cheese, rather than expensive supplements.
Yeah.
But if you are going to buy a supplement, make sure it's got billions of microbes in there, and it's pretty fresh, and it's from a reputable brand. And there are studies showing that if you take those, if you're taking antibiotics, it's a good thing to do.
Would they ever be destroyed by any added sugar potentially to
yes,
shop bought ones?
We think they inhibit it. Sugar, if you mix sugar and microbes, they don't. Sugar is an antibacterial substance used to keep bacteria away. So you should never really mix your yogurt with sugar directly. It won't work as well, and so that goes for these other products. But they tend to use artificial sweeteners, which again, I'm not sure is a great idea. So some of these ones are a bit too sweet when you take them.
Do you think that in today's day and age, with all our processed food, that we are inadvertently destroying a lot of our gut microbes?
We're certainly disrupting them. You destroy them really by starving them, primarily. So if you don't give them fibre, that for long periods of time you can wipe them out. And if you remember, I did this experiment on my son,
Yes.
Tell
our viewers about
with
that.
During my book, I was doing all kinds of experiments myself. And I just finished the 3-day raw milk French cheese diet, which I totally recommend for day 1. Day 2, not so good. By day 3, you really had enough cheese, believe me. And I was due to
Please don't repeat any of these experiments at home. Yeah, carry on.
And I was due to do the 10 days of only eating at McDonald's. And as you can imagine, I was really looking forward to that. But then my son came along and volunteered. And he was a student, he was hard up for money, and he actually liked McDonald's. And so he did this, and after 10 days, he'd lost about 40% of his diversity of his species. And although I sent him parcels and fruit parcels and vegetables afterwards, he never really fully recovered from that. So actually, even a year later, he's still down. When we've tested our own microbes, I'm at the top of the British population scale, and he's right down the bottom. So he keeps reminding me of what I've done to him. Now, it may recover in time, we don't really know, but it is a lesson there that if you go for some long period of time really on a very restrictive diet, I think you've got to be very careful. And this is it's not just McDonald's, but all kinds of restrictive diets when people are just going on one thing, whether it's a paleo diet, you only have meat or whatever it is, certain species can't survive very long without it.
I see. Did you tell McDonald's? Did you get a response from them?
No, and I don't think it was anything specific about McDonald's,
It's not specific to McDonald's, and we don't encourage anyone to repeat that experiment.
If you'd just gone up, whether it been any other chicken restaurant or anything else,
the
fast
nature
food.
was that it was a restricted diet in that he just ate the same thing.
Highly processed food with negligible amounts of fibre, and if you do that for a long length of time, I think they've shown that in animal mice, you get different bacteria coming out, and you can start to erode the lining of the gut and have all kinds of other problems. So,
are there environmental ways in which we are causing an imbalance in our gut diversity? Like, is using antibacterial hand soap contributing to? Is anything antibacterial killing off our good bacteria?
yes, so there's a trade-off really here between our modern world where we're trying to avoid outbreaks of nasty viruses, norovirus and these other things, or salmonella outbreaks or campylobacter in food handling, versus people taking that into their homes and being overzealous. And generally in the home, if you just be careful around what you're cooking, whether it's you're cooking chicken or whatever, you make sure that you wash things afterwards. But some people just take it to extremes and are doing far too much hygiene, and that is, with overwashing, you're killing off a lot of our microbes and reducing the amount we have, because when we compare ourselves with hunter-gatherers who don't have all these things, they have nearly double the amount of the diversity of microbes that we do.
In your book, you talk about a kind of hygiene hypothesis with allergies as well. Do you think it's clean living that has led to such a massive increase in allergies in the last 20 years?
I think it's a major contributing factor. No one really understands where this came from, but the first real recorded food allergy was when the year man was on the moon, 1969, and we just think it must have been massively common. But at school, I didn't have anyone I knew with a food allergy. It's happened really in the last 20 odd years. This massive increase, and we have to look why. And I think it's partly restricted diets, which reduces your microbes, processed food, overuse of antibiotics, increase in caesarean sections. So 1 in 4 Britons are now born by caesarean section, which means you don't get the microbes from the mother as nature intended. And all these things are driving this allergy. And also we're not playing in the dirt as we used to be. Very few people kids get to roll around in the garden and swallow a bit of soil and this kind of stuff. But
so we've got a question on this subject from my mum who's watching. Now, I have a severe life-threatening nut allergy. My sister has some allergies, and my mum says, in her words, that we grew up in a house that was never clean. But yet my mum grew up in a house that was spotless and she doesn't have any allergies or any health issues at all. Is there any way to explain that, or is it down to our genes maybe? That we're allergic but we had a dirty house, and she's not allergic but she had a spotless house.
I can't explain that. I think these things are everything I'm talking about here is based on populations, so rather than individuals. And so what you say is in this population, your risk is double or treble if you. And we do know that people who come from smaller homes, who are more well off, will have more allergies than someone who's poorer and had many brothers and sisters. So that's been known for about 30 years now.
Is that just because there are more germs and they get a more diverse?
That's the theory, that there's more germs being passed around. So although and it's all relative. So I don't know how dirty your house was and how your mum was dealing with it, but I suspect that and we know that people with dogs, for example, have generally less allergies, because people with dogs have more microbes as well. So it's always hard to make individual decisions, but in general, we've been going the wrong direction.
Do you think if I got a dog now as an adult, it would help me be more resistant? Or it would help me get over my allergies?
I don't know the answer to that. It could make you worse, it could make you better. But I think in general, you will get more microbes, so it could be worth a try.
I'm genuinely interested in this. Do you wash your fruit and veg? Because I guess if you leave it a bit dirty, you might get more microbes.
That's a very good question, and it's a real dilemma. I think it depends where the fruit and veg come from. So if I'm getting organic fruit and veg, I generally don't wash it. I know where it's come from. If it's stuff that I don't know where it's from, or it's from a major supermarket, it's likely to be full of pesticides. So rinsing it will get rid of a lot of the pesticides, which I don't want to be ingesting because they're bad for my microbes. So it's really hard for people to know which way to go. It's a bit like, do you peel off the skin of what you're eating as well, because that's where most of the nutrients are, the polyphenols that are in there, the fibres in there, but also you've got quite a few pesticides in there as well. So we're sometimes caught between a rock and a hard place. But if you know where your vegetables are coming from, that's the best way to guarantee what to eat, and then I don't worry about washing them then.
Question about sporting performance. Can you tell us what the best way to boost sporting performance might be through gut health? And are there any tips on staving off coughs and colds, improving immunity?
If I had that's like have you got the secret of the universe, So avoid all coughs and colds.
Have you?
I'd love to say I do, but unfortunately I'm a scientist rather than just doing it for publicity. So all these things are complex, made up of lots. So avoiding coughs and colds. Certainly, since I've changed my diet, anecdotally, I've had much less coughs and colds than I used to.
Because you've improved your diversity.
I've definitely improved my diversity. I know that, and I think that's had an effect on my immune system. So again, people who have a wide variety of foods, particularly high plant-based foods, will improve their immunity on average. And sporting performance, there's not that much work being done on sports. Generally, sporty, healthy people have more diverse microbes than not. We don't know if that's cause or effect, but certainly all the evidence is pointing they are related. People with good gut health will do better. Most of the studies are at treadmills of mice running in their little cages, so it's hard to know how they relate to humans. So we do need some better human trials of that.
So really diversity is key for everything.
Yes, and I think diversity with the right foods as well. I mean, it's not just saying let's have 10 different types of crisps every day. That's I think it's
we want the prebiotic fibres, the veggies, and all the polyphenols.
And the polyphenols. I think increasingly we're going to see polyphenols soon have on the packet how many polyphenols this contains.
That would be great. We can't get through all these questions, but I'm just going to end on one subject, and that's the gut-skin connection. We've had a question from Craig about particular foods that could help skin disorders, but I'm also genuinely interested because I had a really stubborn case of dermatitis, and after a few months of drinking a type of kefir, I found that it disappeared, and that seemed to be the only significant variable. I don't know for certain whether it was that, so I'm fascinated to see what you think about this gut-skin connection, whether microbes can help cure skin diseases or conditions.
Yeah, well, there's definitely always been a connection between the gut and the skin. We've known that, and so many of gut conditions also influence the skin, so that you get rashes and things like in that way, like psoriasis, and you're referring to things like eczema, which are very common. That's due to inflammation, and so the idea is if you can get your microbes to produce anti-inflammatory chemicals, then they can have an effect on your skin. And this is what we believe is happening with these cases, and there are quite a few anecdotal stories of young kids with eczema being put on lots of fermented products and gut-friendly diets who can improve. And it's because I think that these natural anti-inflammatory chemicals are coming from the microbes and helping them out. So, good research isn't out there, but all the anecdotal stuff is pointing that there is a reason for this. It's not just
it's not
made
just
up.
a spontaneous thing.
No.
Tim, thank you for answering all of our Facebookers' questions. And Facebookers, thank you for watching
Great questions, guys.
number 2 of Health Hackers. We love your questions. I'm going to lean in to stop the live feed and say join me in January for episode 3. I've got a really good guest, just as good as Tim. Tune in then, and I'll tell you more soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.